Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Ryan Manook. I'm a solutions consultant here at FileMaker, and I'm really excited to be your host for today's Planning Your Custom App webinar, where you're going to learn the essential steps in planning your first custom app with material taken from the Plan Custom App Success Guide. But before we get started, I have some brief housekeeping notes. So for the best experience, we strongly recommend that you participate in this webinar with at least a broadband connection. So if you have any problems or if you require online assistance at any time, please contact Centric's technical support at 888-259-8414. Again, that number is 888-259-8414. Now, during today's presentation, you're going to have the opportunity to type in questions. So let's talk briefly about how to do that. Just go to the GoToWebinar control panel, click on that question section, enter your question, and click on send. And we'll try to cover as many questions as time allows at the end of our presentation, but remember, you don't have to wait until then to submit a question. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mark. He's the president of Skeleton Key, a Platinum FileMaker Business Alliance partner based out of St. Louis, Missouri.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm excited about this topic because one of my primary roles at Skeleton Key is exactly what we're going to talk about today, and that's planning custom apps for our clients. So let's go ahead and get started. So here's a bird's eye view of the three guides in the series. Now, it's not an accident that this diagram is a loop, because custom app development is often cyclical. In fact, we often tell our clients that it's a continuum. You're going to plan, you're going to create, then you're going to deploy, and then eventually you're going to start planning changes to your custom app again, because your business will keep changing, and that for your app can too. And this is one of the most powerful features of the FileMaker platform. Today we're talking about the first step in this series, plan. For those of you who prefer a visual map to the series, here's what the three guides look like at a glance. And here's also a URL that will let you download them all. But before we get started, let's be clear. What exactly is a custom app? A custom app is an app that's created using the FileMaker platform and which is designed to meet the unique needs of your business. A custom app does exactly what you need it to do, specifically the way you need it to be done. It's not a compromise, it's a perfect fit. Now, the plan guide breaks down the planning process into 5 sections, and whether or not you follow the entire process as described, I suggest you give each topic at least some kind of consideration. First of all, what's the goal of your custom app? What outcome will it enable your business to achieve? Who are the stakeholders in the custom app, and what problems are they trying to solve? How will the custom app be connected to other systems in your business? How will it be made available to your users, both where they need it and with appropriate security? And how can you ensure that your custom app will be a success, especially if this is your first time building one? And what options are available to help you make this plan a reality? We're going to cover all these topics. Let's get going. First of all, it's important to remember that a successful custom app will likely need to serve different goals across different groups within an organization. What purpose is this app going to aim to fulfill for your business? What function will it be providing to the teams that will use it most each day? What tasks will it help or allow different users to perform? All of these things actually have to be considered in order for the app to be a success. Now, that said, since your users are on the front lines, their goals will often be where you start. This starts by working to understand what users need to get done and where they need to be when they're performing those tasks. As an additional benefit, of course, if you meet your users' needs, they will come to love your custom app. And if they love it, they're going to adopt it, use it, work to improve it, and act like they own it, which will only serve to help guarantee a success. Now, there's a number of ways you can assess what a user needs, and the guide provides some good examples shown here. These include watching and learning the users as they do the work they're doing now, having conversations and interviews with them, perhaps having focus groups or workshops to have conversations and discussions in general or with other people, and then, of course, creating surveys or questionnaires. But there's some complementary best practices I've learned along the way that I'd like to recommend as well. The first is record. I generally try to record audio, video, or a screencast of how users currently get things done or how they describe their needs when I'm talking to them, which can reveal a lot of nuances and details that written notes will just miss. In fact, it allows you to stay more engaged with the conversation as opposed to constantly turning to write or type something down. The second step is to confirm what you've heard. You have to make sure you have some way to confirm with your users that you accurately understood and documented their needs before you could possibly build something that's going to meet them or improve on how they work. And then the third is prioritize. People have a lot of needs. It can be overwhelming to document them. Fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, custom app development often proves to be a continuum, so you don't have to worry about this. You prioritize the needs that will help them meet the most important goals first and start there. Let me illustrate with an example. Operation Food Search is an organization that helps pair food and nutritional education with the local agencies, organizations, and people that need it here in the St. Louis area where Skeleton Key is based. They were and are a growing organization, and they were seeking ways to work more efficiently and effectively to make their dollars go farther and to serve a larger population. They were using a lot of paper and spending a lot of time waiting for information about donations taken on these paper forms to make its way back from volunteers who were picking up food donations back to the office, and then they were aggregating that information by hand into spreadsheets and tabulating it so they could see how much they got and from where. This process was expensive, it was slow, it was tedious, it was prone to error, and it was an obstacle to achieving their ultimate goals of reaching more people and gathering more food. So I met with them, and we walked through how they did things now in the status quo, and we talked about how they did things and where it could be better. And I recorded all of those conversations and took pictures along the way. Then I made sure that I was able to accurately describe to them where they were, as well as where they would like to go with a custom app. We'll come back to that example, but let's talk more broadly. At some point, you're going to have to document what you've learned, and goal statements are a great technique. They also help you demonstrate to users what you understand. So you've got this kind of format here, what's the goal, and it kind of gives you examples. This comes right out of the guide. The idea here is it's defining what they're doing now, where it's falling short or holding them back, and what they want to achieve as an outcome. To be clear, this is not just a step that's focused on exactly what they do and commiserating on how terrible or inefficient it is. It should also be working to clarify where they want to go so they can have the biggest impact. Another benefit of these statements is that they can deliver a virtual gold mine of information about the kinds of data you want to collect and store, the different user roles your custom app may need to serve, even if those people don't use the custom app directly. For example, in this example here, we don't necessarily know that every single person, the doctors, the receptionists, the patients, are all necessarily going to use the app, but they all have needs that we're trying to meet. Maybe it's speed, maybe it's accuracy, maybe it's just a more efficient way to spend their day. So the goal of these statements is to basically allow us to identify some of that information because we can break it down. You can see here all I've done is bracketed the various nouns or aspects of the information that I think potentially are going to be part of the final solution. In addition, therefore, some of the tasks that the custom app will need to help users perform, or perhaps some of the tasks that it will take care of for them automatically. There's also sometimes hidden requirements during an assessment that no one talks about, but if you can write a goal statement and then analyze that statement, you can often identify that there's other things that need to happen even though no one actually spoke up and mentioned them specifically. Now let's just talk a little bit about something I've noticed along the years with me whenever I'm doing this kind of needs gathering, and that is what I call the split personality that I often feel exists inside of a custom app. At first, a custom app can feel like it's a place for storing structured information, like a data warehouse or a database, and that's often how people build these custom apps. They kind of just become a place to put information electronically, which otherwise was put on a form. Now, on the other hand, your app could also feel like it's a tool for facilitating process. Maybe it's to standardize tasks or organize the workflow. And the reality is that most apps live somewhere in the middle. They're a little bit of both. They have to organize and store information, and they also have to manage tasks and workflow, which is very much like humans. So it's really just an extension of the users. The goal is to make the users more effective and efficient so that they're not doing all the tedious menial labor or necessarily missing important steps or information along the way. Okay, so now I've talked about how things work now and to a certain degree why they might be that way. The next section in the plan guide is all about guiding you through a methodology for defining how things will need to work in the future. Who will use your app? What will the app need to do? Where will they use the app? When will they use the app? All these things are part of sort of partly the status quo and a little bit about where they would need to, the practical requirements of what they would need to do if they move forward. But we actually need to start to describe more specifically how the app is actually going to function to help them achieve those goals. Now, in the interest of brevity, I'm not going to walk you through the next 7 or 8 pages of the guide. I'll simply say there's a great overview throughout those pages, and there's some great examples about how to ask the kinds of questions that will generate clear answers and move you toward defining a specific set of requirements for your custom app. Now, you'll hear me throughout this conversation, if you haven't already, use the word needs and requirements kind of interchangeably, and they are. You could talk about it as needs gathering or requirements gathering, or needs definition or requirements definition, but it's really interchangeable. The goal is, what does the app need to achieve for the business, the teams, and the users? What are those outcomes that we're trying to get? And then how are we going to define basically descriptions of the features and functions and tasks that the app is going to walk the users through or let them do so that they can get those needs fulfilled. So let me suggest you read those pages, but also consider a complementary resource. The FileMaker Custom App Academy video series, section 201, lesson 1, begins with many similar considerations for the planning phase, and it's a perfect companion to the material in the plan guide. Now, later in the presentation, I'll share a URL for the Custom App Academy, which is part of FileMaker's free learning resources. In any case, whether it's a methodology outlined in the plan guide or what you learn from the video series, the idea is to become more effective at creating a comprehensive list of the needs for your custom app. Now, these will tend to be grouped into categories like the ones you see here and in the plan guide. And in fact, I often use these kinds of categories as a reminder to help me ensure that different aspects of the custom app have been discussed and considered with the users. It's almost like a checklist to remind you of the things that you need to go through and cover before you actually end your conversations or your surveys. But wait, there's more. They may still have some technical questions that remain to be answered, in which maybe your users aren't the best source for providing information. So this is a great opportunity for you to include any IT stakeholders who may have requirements of their own, or maybe they have important guidance to offer about how things work now or what you'll need to consider in the future. What's more, other teams, perhaps other users and even businesses that are upstream or downstream of this custom app may also have unmet needs that should be considered. So part of what you have to think about is, where is this information coming from, and what kind of security needs to be used along the way, and how is this going to be deployed out there, and some of the technical hurdles that may come up here along the way. Later, I'll show you an example from Operation Food Search where I actually created some diagrams to illustrate some of that to help me and the IT stakeholders and even the customer understand sort of what was happening before and after their app. And let's be honest, if you own and control all of your data sources, then you can build and deploy your custom app more easily because you're kind of operating in a bubble. But if you need a system administrator or some other system inside or outside of your business to provide data to your customer or to access the data collected by and stored in your custom app, then the complexity can get pretty terrible pretty quickly. So the idea here is to basically understand where this data is coming from. A lot of us use software that's in the cloud. A lot of us have different kinds of legacy systems in our businesses. And it would be good to understand how those might need to interact with our custom app. And as mentioned previously, the reality is often your custom app will start out simple, and then it will grow in complexity as its value to the business increases. So don't be scared about the fact that if you discover something that you're not sure how you're going to integrate with it or how you're going to secure it right up front, that you have to tackle that necessarily up front. It's possible that your first round with your custom app can be focused on simpler goals, and you can tackle those challenges later. And security we can't really understate. It's becoming more and more of a concern every day. Just pick up the newspaper. So you need to consider some important questions here. And you need to be open to keeping things simple whenever you can. You have to embrace complexity when it's truly required, but you shouldn't try to make it harder for yourself than it has to be. So some considerations you might want to consider here. How are you going to store customer and employees' personal information? Are you going to be storing any trade secrets or product information in the database? Are you going to be interacting with credit card numbers or other financial data? What kind of regulations apply to your industry? Do you have HIPAA or FERPA requirements, PCI compliance? Who's going to access your custom app and when? And with what level of control? And do you have to have some kind of audit trail or access log for that in order to be compliant with whatever your business requires or needs? Now, not all these things may apply to you right off the bat, but it's still something that you should consider and perhaps spend a little time getting educated about, and then determine whether or not these are security challenges that you have to tackle in the first round. Last but not least in your list of requirements is the idea of delivery and accessibility. How are you going to actually deliver the solution to your users? Are you going to use FileMaker Pro? Are you going to use FileMaker Go? Are you going to use web browsers and FileMaker WebDirect or some other web publishing approach? Maybe you're just going to be sending information to them via email or in reports. How many people need to access the custom app? And by which of the delivery methods I just mentioned? Do you know what kind of traffic patterns you're going to have, or what kind of load you're possibly going to be putting on the server that's hosting the solution? Will they be accessing the custom app remotely? Are they just going to be at the office, or are they going to be in the field? If so, are we planning to put it out on the internet and host it in the cloud? Or will they need some kind of VPN connection back to the office to keep the information extra secure? Who will administrate the custom app? Who's going to verify the backups? Who's going to manage access and give people access and take it away? Again, some of these sound like technical questions, and they are, but they really start with conversations with your users and teams and the managers and decision makers, because they're the ones, once an app is successfully deployed, who are going to determine how large an audience it might serve both internally and externally. Now, finally, we get to stretch a different set of muscles. We've talked and we've asked questions and we've written things down and we've gotten into technical security questions, but now we got to get into potentially some sketching and prototyping. So we've got good enough requirements. We need to start visualizing what this custom app will look like and what the user experience will be for your users. In many ways, this is like sketching out a vegetable garden or perhaps a floor plan about how you're going to remodel or reorganize a family room. It's a lot easier and a lot less expensive to plan this on paper or something like paper before you actually start breaking ground or you're back figuring it out in the real world. As a father and a husband, I've done this several times in my own house, and I've found it's invaluable, even when I'm just doing projects in the garage for myself, to sit down with a piece of paper and plan it out a little bit so I can visualize what it's going to look like before I actually start spending time and money trying to make it be that way, and then finding out that I missed something along the way. So there's a lot of tools out there to help you prototype your custom app, and I'm going to recommend you pick the most familiar and available options first. For me, nothing beats a whiteboard for the ease of use and flexibility. I even have a portable one. You'll see a picture here in a minute that I use for Operation Food Search that lets me take a whiteboard anywhere I go, so I don't have to worry if I've got a conference room to meet in or whether I can just go ahead and do it in someone's office. Paper can be a better choice for some people. It's really portable, easy to stick in your bag. Graph paper can be helpful as it keeps things kind of clean and organized. And there's even some links inside the plan guide which will take you to specific templates of mock-ups of both iPad and iPhone interfaces that will help you kind of maybe sketch within those different formats if that's something that you're a little unfamiliar with. But I'll encourage you to keep expanding the toolkit of resources that are available to help you do your visual prototyping so you can explore firsthand some of the benefits these other tools can offer. For example, I also use OmniGraffle a lot, and I've been using it for years to do my drawings, and you'll see some examples of that. My team has adopted Balsamiq in the last few years, which helps us do some mock-ups as well, and then we've even used Draw.io when we need to share that information more easily with stakeholders outside of our business. These types of e-tools can be a lot easier for a number of reasons. Maybe I wouldn't say easier. They can be a better choice at times than paper and whiteboards. First of all, they support versioning, so you can see how your sketches and plans are evolving over time. You know, with a whiteboard or paper, you kind of have to keep copies or take photos. They allow you to share and distribute those electronically via email or perhaps via some kind of sharing on the web, and that allows you to bring other stakeholders into the process no matter where they are inside, your company or perhaps out in the other parts of the world. And they also sometimes let you create virtual walkthroughs. So some of these apps actually have clickable objects where you can touch something on the screen with your mouse and simulate a user experience and jump between different sketches and drawings to kind of give people a real sense of how they might move through the actual custom app when it's built. Some people, myself included, even use the FileMaker platform as the prototyping tool. For example, one developer I know, he actually creates simple mock-ups of the solution during his interview process. So while he's talking, he's sort of sitting there, almost like someone you've ever seen who can type without really looking at their hands. He could sit there and create things in FileMaker so that as someone's describing to him some of their needs, he can kind of visualize for them right on the screen what that app might look like and show it to them. And whether that actually is useful to him later or not, it is almost irrelevant. For him, it's about making sure that he sets expectations using the tool that will eventually deliver them. Other people I know, myself included, have used starter solutions to just going in and changing some labels, maybe adding some tool tips and popovers, and basically just doing some sample data just to illustrate some concepts and examples about how the custom app might look and feel. I've even done that with several different starter solutions where I've been able to take a little bit of one and a little bit of another and show people how there'll be a section like this when we're done and there'll be a section like that when we're done, because every custom app is different, so perhaps one starter solution isn't enough to show the whole picture. So let's go back to Operation Food Search. Here are a few sketches I put together on my portable whiteboards, and I shared with the client along the way. This was prior to generating any estimate or any kind of timetable. I was trying to help them understand in one sort of the different steps of the process, and another one I was trying to help them understand how data would move around because they had some integration with SharePoint, and they had some web users, and they had some mobile users and some desktop users and some legacy applications. And my goal here was to help them visualize all of these processes in a way that words would never necessarily suffice. And in fact, we often found that some of the stakeholders were just more visual than they were, technical or written. They wanted to just see it and be able to kind of visually understand it. We then created some mock-ups using Balsamiq, or maybe this actually was done inside FileMaker. I think we created a theme that had this kind of look. But regardless, we was able to show the app for mobile users on the iPad. It answered questions about orientation of the iPad, and they were going to use this in landscape mode. They were actually able to print these out, and then they passed them around to the various types of users who might use them and talked about how they might tap on them and use their finger or a stylus, and we were able to get some useful feedback by watching them navigate these actual mock-ups before we actually started building anything. At some point, though, we did have to write down requirements. We needed to kind of create a scope of work, something that was going to be, in our case, because we're consultants, part of the contract of what we were going to build. But I think this could be very useful even if you're building a custom app for your own business. It gives you, kind of challenges you to write things out, not just draw them, and kind of fill in certain details. Now, this was also a work in progress. We were constantly revising and describing and defining these features as we were planning to build the custom app. And of course, they were really just guidelines. When we actually built the custom app and brought the pictures and the words together and got some feedback from the users with the actual app as it was kind of coming to life, then we continued to make slight tweaks. You'll note also that when you do these kinds of descriptions, sometimes they're more technical in nature and other times they're more goal or task oriented, and that's okay. There's no one way, right or wrong, to write down these kinds of requirements. In this particular project, we had some technical planning as well to do. So we needed to make sure the IT folks understood how things were going to wire together, where the data was coming from, where the synchronization was going to be, because there was a mobile component for us, and we needed to make sure that these devices could work offline. And we had to talk about security. So this wouldn't necessarily be the kinds of diagrams that every custom app would require. I think some simple sketches on a whiteboard and a good list of the features is probably the baseline that most of you will need. But in certain cases, you might find it beneficial to document some of the other aspects of the app to help you and others remember what the plan is and make sure that when you actually go to build it, you don't forget those things. So another vote for paper, or at least some kind of printing or photocopying. Again, like I mentioned, something you can actually put on a clipboard or maybe lay flat in a service and let your users kind of inhabit it for a little bit. This idea that they could actually take a mock-up of an app and use their finger and tap on it and go from drawing to drawing to drawing to kind of get a sense of how they will move through things can be a really powerful prototyping process. But again, I'll remind you of some of the tips I gave you before. When users are doing that kind of working through your app or giving you feedback about an app that you've built perhaps and that they're logging into from their desktop, I always think it's a good idea to record some audio of that conversation when you get that feedback, or maybe record video as they're tapping along so you can analyze that later. Because sometimes people will tell you one thing, but they'll actually be doing a different thing, or they'll be doing something subconsciously, and then you'll want to make sure you can catch that. You need to keep your eyes open and your mind open to some unanticipated obstacles and even some opportunities that might manifest themselves during testing. There's been plenty of examples I can think of where our users have been testing our apps and we've identified unnecessary fields or buttons or unnecessary steps or a missing step because we saw them pause and they weren't sure what to do. It's also, of course, useful to ask questions of your users and confirm your understanding of what is or isn't working for them. It's one thing to observe and to make some assumptions, and another thing to call it out and ask them to please confirm that what you're seeing is actually what's going on. In the end, for Operation Food Search, we developed a custom app that allowed their mobile users to eliminate their paper use entirely. And they were able to submit their donation receipts in real time back to the office. The result was more food collected, less food wasted, less paper consumed, and much better data quality for allowing them to analyze and plan to make sure that they were picking up the maximum amount of food that was available. This was even good for the donors because even though they weren't people that we interviewed, even though they'd never used this app, they wanted to make sure that all their food that was going to spoil, that they were trying to donate so that they could use it as a charitable donation, was actually being picked up. And if we could give them real-time information about those donations and not require them to shuffle paper receipts around inside their organization, then they were able to, in real time, contact their stores or their various outposts and make sure that they were maximizing their donation process. So that's a great example of a stakeholder who came up in our conversations but was actually never given a feature of their own, but they benefited and it kept us in mind the whole time. So now let's not kid ourselves. Whether you do it yourself or you hire a consultant or a coach, this stuff takes investment of time and money. Now, the scale of the investment can vary, and this depends on how complex your needs are, the features you feel are must-haves versus the features that are nice-to-haves, which might wait for later, how much time you need to spend gathering and prototyping and developing, and whether or not you have time in your schedule to do all that work, and what your budget is. You know, even though we know that there's a ROI, a return on investment, for building custom apps that make our people more productive and provide more accurate information, it's always difficult to spend a little time up front, whether it's personal or business, investing in those improvements that will pay off later. Now, the plan guide ends with several suggestions about how to move forward. Here's my brief summary of them, but you'll find 3 or so pages at the end of the plan guide all about this. First of all, if you want to do it yourself, you've got several great resources. The FileMaker Learning site connects you to the Custom App Academy, which has training series, information, webinars, discussions, various videos like the one I mentioned previously, and tutorials. The official FileMaker community connects you with other FileMaker users and experts. And often you can find that several of those people, I don't know how they do it, but they spend all day answering questions to help other people. Back in the day before there was a FileMaker community, I myself spent a lot of time on mailing lists learning the platform from others who were willing to give me their time. The FileMaker support site provides product documentation and knowledge-based articles and installation guides, and even though I've been using FileMaker for 20+ years, I still frequently find myself looking up information on that support site. It's a great resource. And then, of course, there's third-party training available through lynda.com, and even some FileMaker Business Alliance partners are out there to help you provide training, whether it's in a classroom or perhaps some kind of screen sharing format. You can always hire a consultant. There's lots of different folks out there who do consulting, like Skeleton Key. The FileMaker Business Alliance is a great resource, and there's a partner search that will help you find a partner either by the type of partner or their geography or what they specialize in. And then you can always do a coaching arrangement. This is something we do with several of our clients where they want to do it themselves, but they know they're going to get sometimes into a jam, or they're going to want to do a little bit of planning before they actually dive right into a more technically complex issue, or they're trying to plan the right way they should create a user experience that would be the most effective. And rather than doing a lot of extra work prototyping and getting user feedback, they're looking for an expert to help provide them some advice about what's worked in the past or what kinds of technical hurdles or options might be out there to allow them to address a security or an integration challenge. Now, I can't resist some words to the wise. I want to lighten things up and share some hard-won wisdom. So let me just preach a little bit. A few of these quotes are cheeky, but they're still true. Perhaps the most important quote here is the last one. And I maintain that this is the most important because technology keeps changing and so does your business. And amending your custom app so it keeps fitting your business like a glove takes time and attention, but mostly it takes habit and foresight. You've got to make it a habit to check in with your users, see how the app needs to be evolving to continue to meet their needs. I don't think I'd be exaggerating to say I have dozens, if not over 100 stories of situations I've encountered where people have a custom app that fit them really well 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and people loved it for a year or two, but then as the business evolved, no one maintained or continued to evolve the custom app. And now they've got a custom app that fits them maybe 30%, and they've got all these workarounds or extra things that they're doing. It's almost like they forgot that the app wasn't made of stone, that they could actually continue to evolve and change it if they just made it a regular part of their process. So it's really up to you as the custom app developer to be vigilant and make sure that you continue to check in with those users even after that initial launch and success. Okay, so I'm almost done with the slides, just a few more, and let's go from there. So what's next? So the same link we shared above about downloading the guides in the series will actually point you toward the Create Guide, which is going to walk you through how to start building your custom app, how to design layouts for a user interface, how to do scripting in FileMaker to kind of automate and kind of create a user experience that flows. And I just recommend you download that guide and start there. Now, let me remind you briefly about how to enter questions. You go to the control panel for GoToWebinar, click on the questions section, enter your question, and click send. And if for some reason we don't have time to get to all your questions, my team at Skeleton Key would be more than happy to field your emails or phone calls and help you figure out how to get where you want to go and how to get started. So now I'll turn it over to Ryan to start fielding your questions. Ryan.
Mark, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. And one of the top questions that we're getting right now is whether you'll get a link to this recording. You absolutely will. So after this session, you will be forwarded a link in a follow-up email. All right, Mark, the first question. I have an auto parts business. Can FileMaker be used to create a catalog system of auto parts with the ability to look up parts for any vehicle?
So the short answer is absolutely. In fact, I'd recommend you look at the Invoices Starter solution. We have a client who came to us through the Idea to iPad program at Apple stores in California who had the exact same requirement. He did custom auto parts, I think mostly for various types of dune buggies or other kinds of performance vehicles that were used in the desert or in rough terrain. And there's a filtering, there's a product listing in there, and there's a filtering tool that allows you to filter and find those products. And we added some enhancements to that starter solution to kind of amp up the filtering options to give him a lot more granular control. But the short answer was he could almost use the starter solution as is, and we just added some features to enhance that process.
Perfect. The next question, talking about the prototyping resources, have you looked at Adobe XD for prototyping, and can you comment on that?
I can't say I personally have used Adobe XD for prototyping. I do know the other day I just met with a potential client, and they themselves were using some Adobe products for some of their own prototyping. I don't know if they're using Adobe XD though, so I'm going to do that as a follow-up for me. It's another tool it sounds like I need to learn about.
All right, the next question. Are tablet apps limited to iPad, and what options do you have for Android?
Great question. So you've got a number of different choices when it comes to delivering FileMaker applications to mobile users. So as you mentioned, of course, with the current versions of iOS across various types of iOS devices, you're able to use FileMaker Go and natively deliver those applications, which gives you obviously a broader set of features that you can access from FileMaker. For other, even for those devices, as well as for Android devices, and for that matter, even desktops with browsers, you can also use FileMaker WebDirect, which in a simple way I could say is like FileMaker in a browser. It's a very high fidelity experience with a lot of the features that you expect to have in a FileMaker layout made available to the user but via their browser. And so that is usually the best option for delivering FileMaker solutions to Android devices. Also, sometimes it comes up in this question space is the question about what about Surface devices and Microsoft. Well, there are different models of Surface. Some models of Surface can run FileMaker Pro natively. They're really just like a PC, and so just like a Mac or a PC laptop or desktop, you can load a full client on them. And others are more like a mobile device. They don't have that same operating system, and so therefore they would be more like an Android device where using FileMaker WebDirect or some kind of custom web publishing would be the best way to deliver FileMaker solutions to those users.
All right, the next question, back to prototyping. Mark, can you comment on whether or not you've tried using FileMaker as a prototyping tool and how successful that was compared to the other resources that you mentioned?
So yes, we've used FileMaker as a prototyping tool, and by we I mean me and various members of my team, intermittently over the years, but it certainly comes up regularly. In fact, I think just the other day I saw one of my team members had done something like that for a customer. The reasons we do that vary. Sometimes it feels like what they want is fairly concrete, and we feel like it would be easier to just jump to prototyping in FileMaker itself. As a mechanism for showing them something that we could then maybe leverage later. Maybe we can take that layout we prototyped and we could use it as a template or a basis for what we're going to do. One of my developers, and I think he might have put this on our blog, even created a balsamic style theme in FileMaker so that we could create FileMaker prototypes that looked kind of rough like balsamic does. There's some benefit sometimes to those rough drawings. I'm an architect sort of by training back in my college and university days, and it really appealed to me when you encounter these tools like balsamic or even a FileMaker theme that's designed like that, because you can make these kind of rough sketch drawings that look somewhat technical and accurate but still have kind of a hand-drawn quality, which means you're not over-promising to the user what they're going to look like when they're done, which sometimes you can feel like you're doing when you use more polished themes. I'd say another reason that you often will use FileMaker is because often you're going to be doing this process not sort of from scratch, but with an existing custom app. So someone will have a custom app, or you'll have built one that they've been using for a while. You'll be talking about new functionality, and it just makes sense to take a copy or a backup of that custom app and to continue to evolve some of the changes you want to make right there on the layouts in that copy, knowing that you can always throw away that copy. There's no harm to using the backup, but that in your case, it doesn't make sense to go back to paper when they actually are used to the app and they'd like to just see how the app might evolve over time. So I would put a strong hands up as there's nothing wrong with using it, especially if you're really comfortable navigating inside FileMaker Bro's design tools, and those design tools, as you all know, have gotten much better and better over the years. If that's an area you're really comfortable, then there's no reason that you should necessarily learn another tool. You could just keep using FileMaker.
Perfect. All right, the next question, what are the different options for hosting FileMaker?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. So as part of your planning, and this really kind of gets more, I think, into deploy. So I'd recommend you download the deploy guide, first of all, because they're going to talk there about various considerations. But to make sure I answer your question, you really technically have, I would say, 3 options to keep it as simple as possible. The first option is sort of an informal and for very, very small work groups. It's one that we tend to not use that often because we really like some of the features of the second option. But the first option is just peer-to-peer. You can take an actual copy of FileMaker, you can build a custom app, you can enable sharing, and then anybody who's on your local network with you, up to, I believe, 5 additional users of either Pro or Go, can actually connect to your machine hosting that FileMaker app and work as a work group. It's very good if you're going to a conference or a sort of off-site somewhere and you still want to use this app and sort of share it. It's great for startups and small companies. Now, the downsides of that, of course, is that I'm the host on my laptop. I haven't had to do any special configuration. It's just baked right into FileMaker. But if I close my laptop, I just cut everybody off. If I crash my laptop because I'm using mail or a browser in the background, I could potentially destabilize my computer, and that could put my custom app and the other users' work at risk. So the second option is my preferred option, which is to host it using FileMaker Server. So there's really 2 choices there. One is you could host it on-premise, meaning on a physical box or a virtual box at your office. There are various options for hosting that on either Mac or Windows operating systems. Or you could host it in the cloud, and there's really 2 options there. You could use FileMaker Cloud, which is sort of a package service available in Amazon's marketplace, allowing you to host high-performance solutions up there in the Amazon cloud, or you could do it yourself. There's various ways that you can either go to a hosting company or even Amazon and spin up a Mac or a Windows server and install it up there just like you would on-premise. So really, in conclusion, peer-to-peer for very small work groups for maybe informal testing, on-premise or cloud-based servers when you want to actually go the next step, and then potentially a hosting company, which again could be a physical server or a virtual server as well. For us at Skeleton Key, most of our clients fall into either on-premise, where they have the appropriate infrastructure in their organization, and maybe because of their integration needs or their security desires, or just because they want to have performance be local, they host their solutions on-premise in their own servers. And the rest of our clients tend to host up in FileMaker Cloud, where we manage that FileMaker Cloud for them, make sure it's backed up, help them with any troubleshooting, but then we make sure those solutions perform well and they're highly available up in the Amazon cloud.
Perfect. All right, the next question. Mark, we're planning on having multiple developers working on a single solution. Do you have any tips on how to divvy up the work and keep everyone from stepping on each other's toes?
That can be a little challenging, and we do similar things here at Skeleton Key, although not that frequently. Part of this is to do with the fact that only one developer at a time could be in the schema, modifying fields and tables. You could find yourself running into each other in Script Manager, kind of working on scripts. And so and certainly you could host a solution which allows some of that kind of activity to take place in parallel, but there will invariably be places where the platform is not going to make it easy for you to both be in there doing similar kinds of work. So we handle that 2 different ways. I should say 3 ways at Skeleton Key. Sometimes we just do that. We host the solution in a development server. We make sure that the 2 developers, or however many developers, know the rules through some trial and error as to how FileMaker does or doesn't allow them to both do similar tasks simultaneously, and then they plan their work accordingly. Notice I use the word plan. They don't just wade in there and start working. They think about the kind of work they're going to be doing each day or each week. They divvy it up to make sure that they're working on it in ways that won't run into each other and create delays. Another option we use is version control system. So like you've heard of Git or you've heard of Subversion, even though FileMaker is a binary, and even though that I mean it's a complex data file, we still allow ourselves to use it because we have lots of other source material, and it's a great way for us to kind of take a snapshot of a file, download a copy of it, check it out, make changes. When we're done, send those back up to the repository so the other developer can check it out, make changes to it, and submit it, and so on. So even though we're not simultaneously working on it in that situation, we're able to pass off a current version to each other seamlessly. So as far as I can tell, there's just one copy. It's the copy that I've checked out. And all I have to do is make sure that I update that copy before I open it up and start doing development work. And then the final choice, I guess, would be to work in some kind of modular way, something where you, it's similar to the first one, but it's a little bit more discrete, something where perhaps you've got a separation model where there's a data file and a user interface file that won't eliminate all the obstacles of co-development, but it will eliminate some. You could do some kind of extreme programming or pair programming where one of you is developing and actually hands on the keyboard and mouse while the other one is sitting there collaborating. That's a very effective technique for getting the code done properly because you've got two sets of eyes on it, but only one set of hands. Another option is to split the work. Maybe someone's doing layout work and interface work and someone else is doing scripting work, and so you're kind of making sure that you're not running into each other because you're kind of divvying up by specialty, and that could also work well if one of you is stronger than the other. So there's a lot of different techniques out there. Obviously, if we get into integration with other platforms, that even expands the options for specializing people's activities so you can co-develop. But the best thing is probably to try hosting the file and do a little bit of trial and error to get familiar with places where you might run into each other to make sure you understand how that might be an obstacle you have to work through.
Excellent. All right, the next question, Mark, when you're planning on developing for clients who will use desktop web and FileMaker Go, is there any benefit to building out a particular set of layouts first, like the desktop layouts, then the Go layouts, or is it just based on preference?
You know, I would have to say it's based on preference, and if not preference, it's probably based on priority. So we've had several solutions that we've built which have both desktop and mobile interfaces. You know, I will say that when we're doing mobile interfaces for FileMaker Go, or even WebDirect interfaces for web users if they're using Android devices or need to use web browsers, those interfaces do take more time to design in our experience. They do take more time to test, and that's because there's some variables there you don't have as much control over. You know, in FileMaker or FileMaker Go, you sense that you have a lot more control of the application environment. But on a phone, you know, phone calls can come in and other apps might be involved and the device could get put to sleep. And so there's some questions about how that's going to behave. If you're using FileMaker WebDirect, you've got a browser and perhaps a browser you didn't plan on. And even though you have minimum requirements for FileMaker WebDirect, you can't always control what the user tries to launch. So some testing in different web browsers is required. And because people are used to different kinds of experiences on apps on mobile devices or web browsers, the design bar is a little higher. So we find ourselves wanting to make leaner, simpler designs because we have a smaller window to work in, or we have users who expect a different kind of experience than a desktop user who may have multiple screens or perhaps a lot more real estate to offer. I think for us it boils down to deciding and prioritizing which user group, the mobile group or the desktop group, is the priority for the launch. And if both are, you're probably going to be working on those interfaces in tandem, which could be good. There could be some things that you learn as you streamline a mobile interface that would help you make a more intuitive or useful desktop interface and vice versa. So I think I could see the argument for getting it perfect in one place and then trying to kind of pare it down or modify it for the other, but I think that those types of users and those user experiences are potentially so different at times, at least now. I think we're all seeing a convergence, right, of the desktop and mobile in terms of the apps that we use and the way we interact with the screens. But right now, there still are a lot of differences, keyboard and mouse versus finger or stylus and gesture, that we're going to probably find some benefit to developing these in parallel so we can learn from each what works best and create interfaces that are optimized for each of those different types of users.
Awesome. All right, Mark, can you elaborate on having two files, a data file and an interface file, and what are the best use cases for that type of deployment?
So I can elaborate on it. I'm not sure if I can give you the best use cases because it's not necessarily a process that I've done a lot of in the past. The concept here is that if you have a single FileMaker file, you're allowed to have data sources that are right inside there, you know, tables and fields that are baked into that same FileMaker solution. And you're also able to integrate other tables of data and other data sources that are perhaps stored externally. Maybe they're stored in other FileMaker solutions and you don't want to recreate that same data set, so you'd like to borrow the customer or the parts list from another existing file, and you want to bring that table into your solution. And you can incorporate those other data sources right into your relationship graph. The same is true of some external SQL sources. Sometimes we just query and get data from a SQL source. Other times we actually connect live using external SQL source support in FileMaker and embed those tables into our relationships graph so that they can become part of the fabric of what we're weaving in our custom app. So some people have taken this idea and said, okay, well, if I can do that with an occasional FileMaker file, or I can do that with an external SQL source, would there be some benefits to doing this right off the bat? Like have one FileMaker file that is my custom app interface, and have another FileMaker file that is my custom app data. And I think that was driven in part by two reasons. Back in the day, people were looking for ways to improve performance, and there was a sense that if I can make the layout with all of its objects and graphics and other things separate from the data, I might be able to distribute that file, and people could use that file and have that be separate from the data. And other times it was driven by a desire to roll out new interfaces. You know, I wanted to update the interface but not update the back end with all the data in it. Is there a way that I could do that and quickly, you know, take the interface file down and bring it back up and not have to migrate all my data? Like if I've got millions of records, do I really want to move all that data from file A to file B when I roll out, you know, the second version of my app? Maybe if the version of my app is really most what people see, then maybe I could have a separate interface file that would be much quicker to send out. The data could just keep staying where it is. The reality is that it has become easier and easier and continues to get easier, as we can see from what FileMaker is sharing with us about the roadmap. It's getting easier and easier to upgrade your FileMaker solutions, whether you're using commercial features in the marketplace or stuff that's mentioned in the roadmap from FileMaker. And the same is true of performance. Performance is getting better and better for FileMaker over time, which means the need to separate these the file from the data or the interface from the data is becoming less over time because the performance is so much better. So I think in my mind, a lot of the reasons for separation model, and this is just a personal opinion, are fading away a little bit, or it's getting a little blurry. There's still some practical, I'm sure, examples, and people, I'm sure, in the chat right now are mentioning some of the other practical reasons for separation model. But I think it boils down to this. It's a preference. There could be some technical reasons, arguments you could make, but if you feel that having your interface separate from your data because of how you expect your interface or your data to evolve over time, or because of the size of your data, some reason feels to you like that's the smart play, then I think you should go ahead and do that. And there's lots of blogs and technical articles out there that I think have already done the scouting work to tell you what are the obstacles, you know, the pros and cons of that approach. The same thing is true if you go the other route and you build it all into one file. There's some trade-offs there, much more portable, and maybe, but of course when you make certain changes, you know, it's to take the system down or it's to roll the data between version A and version B. I want to be clear too, these problems about separation or consolidation are true of virtually all software platforms. FileMaker is a little unique in the sense that it has, it's a lot unique, but it's a little unique in the sense that it has, right off the bat, data and interface all combined into one file format. And so the default is that. But most other platforms, kind of have a separation of data and interface, which is why they're so complex. So keep in mind, if you do separate, you're giving away a little bit about FileMaker gives you for free, but there could be some technical arguments that would merit that.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mark. Great advice, fantastic advice throughout the webinar and Q&A. We're all very, very fortunate to have you present. And that's all the time we have. On behalf of Mark and behalf of FileMaker, it was our pleasure chatting with you. We hope you're able to take away some tips to integrate into your own custom app planning, and we definitely hope to see you on another webinar soon. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone.